Hello and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Global Forum, a model for high quality, equitable distance learning. I'm George Edwards, the Chief Accreditation Officer at NEASC. Working with me today is Diane Ullman, International Accreditation Leader for the NEASC Commission on International Education. Today's session features the work of the Center for Public Research and Leadership at Columbia University. They've been working with the Connecticut State Department of Education, the Connecticut Educational Partners, and the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents to create guidance for schools and districts for the development of high-quality distance learning to respond to the COVID pandemic. This webinar will feature representatives from Columbia University to explain the model and the resources that are part of it. We also have two public school superintendents who were involved in the development of the model to discuss how they used it and how they're preparing for future developments as this pandemic evolves.
It's a pleasure to have everybody with us this morning for this very important and timely presentation. We have two experts in the field of virtual learning, and we have two experienced superintendents who have worked collaboratively with our presenters to implement these strategies that we'll hear about this morning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I'll start with Liz. Liz, can you introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to Michael and our superintendent.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's wonderful to be here today. I'm Liz Chu. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Public Research and Leadership at Columbia University. We're an education research and policy center, and very excited to hear about this meaningful project that we engaged in with partners across the state of Connecticut.
Michael?
Hi, good morning. Thank you again so much for having us. I'm Mike Aaron. I'm a fellow at the Center for Public Research and Leadership, and this has been a lot of our work over the past few months, as it has been for many of you all as well. And we're just thrilled to share what we've put out there and also answer questions today.
Thank you. This morning, Christine, why don't you start?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Christine Carver, and I'm the superintendent of Bethel Public Schools in Western Connecticut. And we were proud to work with Liz and her partner, Michael, in the development of the framework.
And Kathleen Greeter.
Hi, sorry about that. So I'm Kathy Greeter, and I'm the superintendent of the Farmington Public Schools. I've been the superintendent in Farmington for 11 years. Just thrilled to be here. Enjoyed working with Liz and Michael and their team on this important document that's really helped to guide Connecticut through this pandemic and remote learning, and as well as in-person learning.
So before this goes back to George, I just want to say thank you again to our presenters, our panelists. This is actually groundbreaking work to have new research implemented in Connecticut with practitioners who are able to bring it to life in real classrooms, real schools with real kids and parents. So thank you all for being here. Over to you, George.
Thanks, Diane. And I'd just like to add that although this work was done with a focus on the state of Connecticut, the research findings are broadly applicable across schools throughout the region, throughout the country, and throughout the world. So please think about ways that you can take some of the ideas you're going to hear today and apply them in your individual schools and districts. So I'm going to get started and turn our attention to Liz and Michael and the work that was done at the center at Columbia. So I'm wondering if we could get started and just have you explain at a high level what your work was.
Happy to. So we found ourselves, like so many others, at the end of last spring, facing the summer for planning for the fall, and really with the strong intention of having this year look differently and much better than the spring went in the past. So we were asked to focus on creating a high quality, equitable remote learning plan for the state of Connecticut. At that time, at May, June, so much of the effort in Connecticut, just like so much of the effort around the world, was focused on how to bring kids back in person as safely as possible when the fall started. And we thought that work was incredibly worthwhile and valuable. And we also realized that there was a tremendous amount of pressure being put on superintendents, district leaders, teachers, parents, and it would be hard to plan for all scenarios. So with many folks' attention very much on the bringing back all in-person scenario, we worked with a set of superintendents, a set of school support nonprofits, the Superintendents Association, families, the State Department of Education, to think about what would the plan be for remote learning be if and when remote learning became a substantial part of the school year, which now that we're in this school year, I think we know it is a substantial part of the school year. And so we selected a number of districts and educators who had a good amount of success with remote learning in the past spring. So you see two of those wonderful folks here. And we did a lot of work with them to figure out what a reasonable and effective and equitable remote learning plan would be for the fall. And we drew on research, in addition to focusing on the state of Connecticut, research from across the United States to figure out what practices would make the most sense. We tend to work fast. There wasn't a lot of time. I think everyone who's joining this call realized how fast you had to work over the course of the last spring and into the summer and this fall as well. And so basically we built the plan while researching the plan, so that as we were asking questions, we were drafting. And as we were drafting and interviewing additional folks and collecting additional data on what works best for kids, we were vetting the plan with stakeholders across the state and the country to figure out what needed to be adjusted before it went live at the end of July. And then the last thing I'll say, I think, Mike, you have a screen with our process, is that we capped the summer off with a focus on what all of this means for families, because in engaging folks over the course of the summer and figuring out what remote learning looks like, as you all well know, families are a crucial part of this remote learning system. And so families both really appreciated the opportunity to have a voice in what the remote learning plan would look like, and asked for guidance to be directed back to them as well, so that their voices were not just being captured and shared with districts and the State Department, but we were also capturing learning and evidence-based practices and sharing those with families across the state.
Thank you for that explanation, Liz. That's really helpful. I'm wondering if next we can dig a little deeper, and if you could share with us some of the key findings that came from your research.
I would guess that for a lot of you, these key findings are in action in your districts, states, countries. So we organized our findings into 4 sections. The first really focusing on how to structure and operate in the remote learning system. The second on instructional design and delivery. The third on learning community. And the fourth on systems for improvement. And so I'll teach each of these in turn and just provide a little bit more texture. So in structure and operations, obviously, it is crucial to close the digital divide. I'm sure a lot of folks who are calling in have spent a lot of time on that. We didn't have to do a lot of research in this area because a lot was being done by other people, though we did, of course, call out the importance of having a one-to-one student-to-device ratio, making sure the devices being provided were not phones, but did have a keyboard and really served the function that they need to serve for kids to succeed. We also talked about reliable internet with sufficient broadband. The majority of our time was not on the digital divide, though, because, like I said, there's a lot of time and attention already being paid there. So we spent much more time thinking about what a transparent online learning environment and schedule looks like for kids. We did propose a 4 to 5 hour schedule for students and a 7-hour schedule for staff members and adults, making up some of that time between the student schedule and the staff schedule, with a lot of time focused on instructional teaming and a lot of time on outreach and connection with families. We talked a lot about having a consistent setup for the learning management system so that when you are in a school, your classes all look similar and have a shared culture the same way you'd want a shared culture in your physical brick and mortar school. We talked about making choices about serving students on site whenever that's possible, even if you're in a remote learning environment, and even if that means that some of the students are in fact doing remote learning on the school site, but keeping equity at the forefront and realizing that some students don't have the technology or the adult supervision that they might need to do remote learning at home. The second category was around instructional design and delivery. And here, we addressed the fact that there needed to be prioritization of standards that were taught. There are lots of groups in the United States who have done that instructional prioritization, and happy to share references to those if folks would find them useful. We talked about the importance of having culturally responsive and culturally sustaining content and design to the units and the instructional practices that are being used, including over the computer, and when you're doing this virtually, especially given the harm and the trauma that a lot of the families in the United States experienced, both from the pandemic and because of the racial reckoning that happened in our country over the summer. And I know Kathy is one who can speak directly to this, really emphasizing the importance of mastery-based grading and promotion policies so that you get a really strong sense of what students are learning and mastering, as opposed to just what amount of effort they're putting in, which often is a factor in non-mastery-based grading systems. The third category of finding was applied to the learning community. And here we thought a lot about how to establish and communicate high expectations for the entire remote learning setting. So that includes both academic expectations, participation expectations, socio-emotional learning expectations. We started out this entire model and guidance with standards for what instructional design, delivery, learning community looks like. The idea being that standards guide our work in brick and mortar pre-pandemic times, and having that vision of what excellent means is critical to deliver excellence and to not let ourselves fall away from that even in these extraordinary times. We talked about using tiered supports to address students' social emotional learning needs and ways to make sure you have what the equivalent is of the tier 1 supports in your school system. So, thinking about bookending the day with advisory, thinking about one-to-one touch points with students, thinking about how to communicate with families. And that's the last piece about these strong family relationships. And then lastly, I think everyone is likely really trying to do this, but the systems for improvement are crucial in the remote learning environment. And having a theory of action or a hypothesis about a strategy about what you're trying to do as a district school leader, as a teacher leading a classroom, is crucial. Because you need to have a cohesive vision for what you're trying to accomplish and how you're planning to get there, so you can figure out what works and what doesn't. Having feedback mechanisms that allow you to measure that and improve upon it, especially given the uncharted territory that we're in, are crucial. As are having those meaning-making practices. And again, this is something I know the superintendents can speak to on the line here, but how do you collaborate with other instructional and non-instructional staff and administrators in your school building and families and students to figure out what does the data that you're collecting really mean, and what can you do about it? What can you improve in the here and now, and what could you improve, in the next trimester or the next grading period? So those were the findings from a technical standpoint. I would just say that there were some themes that cut across all of these that in some ways, I think are more important than the specifics, or at least equally as important as the specifics, because these guided a lot of the decision points that we were making. First, having really high expectations and quality standards was crucial. Resetting the bar after a really tough spring in the United States was important to make sure this year went better and to make sure we had that guiding vision to plan backward from. The second was equity, just making sure that we were really open-eyed about the fact that there's a lot of ways that this pandemic has hit different communities with varying degrees of harm. And we know that our education system already was serving some better than others. And so having equity as one of the focal points was crucial. As I said, feedback and improvement systems. And then lastly, making sure that you're planning for continuity of instruction, especially given the fact that we anticipated you'd have to be moving back and forth between modalities at many points over the course of the year.
I know one of the issues that many educators are dealing with are the students that are disappearing, that are just, you know, MIA. I'm wondering what are some of the things that your research focused on when it comes to reaching out and making sure that those students are connected with?
Excellent point. I mean, so there are many levels at which these challenges occur. I think that folks have started off stronger this school year than last year, first by trying to close the digital divide, because there was a whole section of students last year who just could not simply participate in school because they didn't have the technology or the setup to make that happen. And I would say similarly about the childcare and supervision situation. So there's just a whole sort of setup and logistics piece that was making it so that a lot of students couldn't participate in school when there was the sudden shift to remote in the spring. That captured a group of students, but of course then there are other issues that can keep students from engaging with the school. And one of the things that we found over the summer is that in the sudden shift, a lot of folks didn't know how to establish and maintain the really strong connections that kept students engaged and provided the support and the encouragement that students needed to get to school. And so again, I know that these are two leaders who can speak directly to ways that they've done it. We heard a lot about developing strong partnerships with community-based organizations. We heard a lot about folks making sure there's a person who is matched to a student to make sure that they're really creating that strong relationship, even in the virtual environment, and checking up and motivating and getting that child to school. We've heard a lot about the importance of advisory systems and things like that to get students engaged in schools. We've also seen this year some really amazing ways that schools and districts are noticing how things that used to motivate kids to come to school are harder in the digital environment. Things, for example, like extracurriculars, specials, other types of offerings like that, and arranging their remote school days so that you can keep engagement up over the course of the day by placing these types of classes at moments that are really helpful for getting students to show up. And then, of course, there are very, there's a small set of students for whom, much more intensive outreach and connection is needed. And that's where having someone who really serves as the one-to-one contact and then a team problem solving around that issue and almost treating it like a case to be solved becomes really, really important.
Well, thank you. That's really good advice for us. I know I just talked to a principal the other day, and that was her biggest concern was, they had the devices, they had the technology, but how do I reach this, percentage of my students that are just not there? So that's great. I know that you've developed some resources and you very generously made them available to folks. So I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about the resources. And then we're going to transition and we're going to talk to our superintendents a little bit about what they're seeing on the ground.
So here's the list of the resources that we created over the summer. All of these are available in Google Docs because our hope is that you would take them, you download them, and use them as a starting point. Model plan for, so the distance learning guidance sets out those standards. It sets out steps for meeting those standards. The model plan describes what this might look like in action. And for this fictional district named Congrove, The goal here was to make them available in Google Docs so superintendents and other leaders could take them, download them, and customize them to their local context. We realized we couldn't create a one-size-fits-all approach, so this is a starting point that we encourage leaders to make their own. We have a folder full of supplemental resources that are available, a focus on instructional teaming, a focus on some evaluation tools, a focus on some stakeholder engagement tools. And then lastly, we have family guides to distance learning for tips, tools, techniques that families can use to engage with schools and engage with their children to support their learning.
So I just want to say that when I first learned about your work, one of the things that I thought was most impressive were the resources. Things that are available for schools. You're again sharing them freely. The Congrove model, where you actually applied the research that you've done to a fictional, but a district, and how it would look in practice, I thought was really excellent. So thank you for that. We would just like to take a second to remind everyone that this is a special edition of our NEASC Virtual Global Forum. It's also a preview day for our NEASC Annual Conference and Showcase. There are additional presentations that will be available after our Global Forum is concluded at 10:30. We'll have 3 concurrent sessions, and then our virtual learning fair will be open with poster presentations throughout the day. So we hope you'll take this opportunity to not only join us now for this webinar, but also check out some of the other really interesting things that are available as part of this preview day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diane, and I know we're going to spend a little bit of time with our 2 superintendents talking about what life has been like in their districts under COVID.
Thank you, George. Kathleen and Christine, you're on here. I want to start with asking you to give us an overview of your school district. Let's just call it a few fast facts about your district, so folks in the audience will know who they're listening to. And also, I think this will resonate with both of you. I'm thinking about the systems, systems for improvement that Liz was talking about. So I know that you always approach your work with thoughts about the sort of the if-then statements. If we do this, then this should be the result. So if you would give us your fast facts about your district, and then give us your sort of general thoughts about how you approach this work in terms of your theory. And so why don't we start with Christine, and then we'll move to Kathleen.
Sure. Thank you, Diane. So Bethel Public Schools is as I said earlier, is a suburban school district in Western Connecticut. We have about 3,100 students, a little over 3,100 students in 5 schools. So demographically, our district is about 31% free and reduced lunch, which has gradually increased over the past several years. We have about 6% of our students are English language learners, and approximately 12% students with disabilities. And our racial and ethnic makeup is about 60% white and about 40% minority. So we sit right outside Danbury. We're about an hour and a half from New York City. And so we've certainly felt the effects of COVID, as we were one of the core areas at the beginning of the pandemic that was hit. So do you want me to switch to Kathy, or?
Yeah, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your sort of approach, your general approach to this work, and then we'll go to Kathy.
Sure. So when we initially went out in the spring to being kind of forced upon distance learning, I think our approach then is very different than what our approach has been in the fall. And if I could just share my screen and just share with you the framework, or the instructional framework that we have been using. Hold on, I've got to learn this. I apologize. So the instructional framework that we utilized when we were, excuse me, I apologize. The instructional framework that we utilized when we were thinking about our work as we entered into thinking about distance learning and remote work for our students really is no different than the framework that we've approached instructionally as a district. So Liz talked a lot about equity, and I'm not going to go through all aspects of this framework, but I will certainly put it in the chat just so you can see it. But with the goal of increasing our student engagement and learning, regardless of the fact that our students are working remotely. So one of the big shifts that we made from the fall to from the spring to the fall was not only looking at making sure that our systems and our structures were available so that all students had the resources and we had equity in resources across our students across the district, but we also wanted to make sure that the kind of the how and what of teaching was at the forefront of our work. And so in that, we really tried to frame our instructional model by looking at how we looked at our curriculum in terms of unit planning and using our coaches and our resources in the districts to make sure that we were prioritizing standards and not remediating, but accelerating based on formative feedback in our delivery systems to ensure that our students were making adequate growth. And one of the other things that I'd like to highlight, I think that was different from the fall to the spring, is really a move from not being completely asynchronous in the spring, but shifting to a synchronous learning model. We think has made a substantial difference in our ability to not only engage our students in learning, but really to ensure that we're providing them the best quality of instructional practices. I think that one of the major shifts between now and then was the shift to adding synchronous learning as a major focus in the district.
So if I'm hearing your sort of organizing principle is that you had curriculum, you had units of study, you have resources and support systems, and you leverage those in virtual learning just like you would have in face-to-face learning.
Absolutely. And, it kind of gets to George's question earlier about the disconnected learner and engagement. We actually found that we had more engagement when we engaged in the synchronous learning piece where they were with their classroom teacher. And we saw more kids attending classes. And it's my belief, and I think my staff's belief, and we have phenomenal teachers to make this work on a day-to-day basis. But my staff's belief is that interaction with a teacher cannot be understated. And that's what created the level of engagement that I think we were missing in the spring. We were trying to be sensitive to all the issues of, being able to access. And so we did a lot asynchronously. We did a lot of recording of lessons, videos, and we found that we had less engagement than we do now in this. And I think that has made a tremendous difference.
Thank you. Kathy, thumbnail about Farmington, and then tell us about sort of your generalized approach to either the synchronous or the asynchronous, whatever system that you're using at the moment.
Sure. So I'm just going to begin by thanking every educator who is here today. This has been a very challenging, unique, but innovative time, and I just wanted to give a shout out to everyone who's engaged in this work. So Farmington is a suburban district in Connecticut, approximately 25,000 residents and just over 4,000 students with 7 schools. Very similar to Bethel, 60% white and 40% minority students of color, where we've increased, even though it's still very low, to 16% free and reduced lunch. And we are a school district that is very systems oriented and has been for a very long time. Diane was part of the school district and laid the foundation several years ago. So I'm very fortunate that many amazing leaders came before me here in Farmington, and I work with, just an incredible group of educators and leaders. We have had a vision of the graduate for over 10 years. So we are one of the early adopters of a vision of the graduate, which has guided in a very disciplined way every element of our school district, every system, every part of our school district, budgeting, everything. And it has made, it's changed our curriculum, the way we assess students, We have now just launched our second version, which is the vision of the global citizen, and we're very excited. It has a real focus on equity and making an impact on the world. So what I think is unique about Farmington is that we're guided by some core documents. One is our vision of the global citizen, our core beliefs, which includes an equity matters core belief, our student-centered framework for teaching and learning, and our theory of action, which includes mastery-based learning. And I can speak a little bit about that. It's learning targets are developed in every classroom, every piece of curriculum. Students engage in looking at that learning target and setting goals for themselves. We always say that, learning is the constant and time is the variable. So we never have one day where there's an assessment. We have several summative assessments. Students know which learning targets they're being assessed on, and they can retake assessments after getting some support during our support and challenge blocks. So students know that it's a process, assessment for learning, not assessment of learning. And students have become very self-directed and understand which learning targets they've mastered and which ones they have not. It has been extremely helpful in the virtual world to have our learning targets already established and our curriculum, firmly in place. So that's just an example. And as far as our planning for this, we're a very collaborative school district. Everything is based on teaming. So we did have teams to help us plan. And some of the key areas the principles we looked at were, number one was health and safety. We all put that as our number one focus, but social emotional well-being. We know that students being away from us has had quite an impact, and we needed to set up the beginning of the year not full of assessments, but really about creating a belonging in our classrooms, creating a safe space. We also had a strong focus on equity and high expectations for academic excellence. I think the key area that we focused on that I have to say has been critical is flexibility, adaptability, and optimism. So those were other areas that we used as our principles for focusing in on our plan. Our plan is about synchronous learning and live streaming throughout the day. We don't have remote teachers. Every student is assigned to the same teacher all year. They can easily flow back and forth from remote only because they feel that they need to stay home at that point or they're quarantined, to in person. So it's very fluid back and forth, and we live stream throughout the day with our own curriculum and our learning targets, and students have a parallel experience, whether you're at home or in school.
So I'm hearing from both of you that you didn't invent new curriculum, new instruction for virtual learning, but you just tapped into your existing programs and practices, which I know represent a pretty high bar. And so you kept that bar high, but you actually did a lot of work to support teachers to be able to reach that bar with their students, and a lot of structures and systems. I think it would be useful for the audience right about now to just kind of hear about what a typical week would look like. I know Christine mentioned 4 to 5 hours of synchronous learning. Kathy, I don't know the number, but I can imagine it's somewhere in that ballpark. But maybe, Kathy, if you just could continue, and then we'll go back to Chris, and just describe, at a pretty high level, what a typical week would look like for synchronous learning in your district.
Sure. So whether you're home as a cohort C student or you're in school in person, we actually have K-8 fully in person, and our 9-12 is in hybrid. Our hybrid is a weekly shift. So cohort A is in for a full week, cohort B is at home, and then it switches the next week. We've actually picked that kind of hybrid because we heard from doctors that was the best, both health-wise and maximizing instruction. And now research has come out that is a favorable model, is the weekly hybrid. So a typical day, whether you're at home in either cohort C or the hybrid group, or you're in person, you are following the school schedule. and you're online, when the school day begins, there are times where teachers are going to go outside, and even though we have Wi-Fi outside now, there will be times where our teachers say, okay, now off you go. And the student does not have to be on the computer the entire day. They will go off the computer to do tasks or take breaks or have lunch, things like that. But the school day schedule is followed. They go to art, they go to music, they go to physical education. Everything is live streamed from our classroom. So students, again, are having a very similar experience at home as they are in school, which has really helped our families quite a bit when they have to make decisions about maybe now pulling back and going remote only. So, that is a typical day. We have full days. We have no remote days. I know that's a model that some districts have picked Wednesday. We're full days, 5 days a week. We're really trying to maximize our in-person time. So, we don't know what the future will hold, but we really put a priority on, maximizing the time that we can be in school. And we hope that we continue to be in school.
Sounds like that model also allows students to make personal connections with their teachers that serve them well when they're not in school.
Yeah, and I think also we use Google Classroom. It didn't have a feature of breakout sessions last year, which was when you're a student-centered, when you have a student-centered instructional model, breakout sessions are essential for class discussions and teamwork. And so that was a real issue for us last year. They've now added that breakout group feature. So I'm in classrooms every week, both in person and remotely, and to watch the students engage in these collaborative discussions again and do group work is really inspiring.
Certainly developing their independent learning skills.
Yes. Yes.
Chris, tell us about your typical week.
Sure. So we just have a little bit of a different hybrid model. So we were fully in person K-8 up until about a week ago when the cases started to tick up in the community, and we were seeing some exposures within the schools. So now we are full in person K-2, and we're in hybrid grades 3 through 12 with a hope that we can switch back. Although, to be honest, it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon based on some current health data. We have a little bit of a different model. We do the cohort A Monday and Tuesday, cohort Wednesday as a distance learning day, and then for hybrid, and then Thursday and Friday as our cohort B, and then we have a cohort A and B, which is our most vulnerable population who attend all of the days, with the exception of Wednesday when they're on distance learning when we're on hybrid. So that is some of our more high needs special ed populations, or some of our English language learners. So we tried to create the continuity for those that are most, impaired. So like Kathy and like Farmington, we have a very similar model of instruction. So at the elementary level, we also use Google Classroom as our platform. So parents and students know at our elementary level that the teacher will post the schedule for the day. And we very much align our instruction with Columbia's model in terms of the Equitable. But like Kathy said, there may be times when the synchronous part of the instruction is a full hour as part of a reading lesson, with breakout rooms. We did switch to Zoom as our resource for video streaming because we weren't sure at the beginning of the school year whether or not they were going to have the breakout feature. And I know that Google has recently added that. So that's, but I agree with Kathy wholeheartedly that that's been a critical part of our instruction. So parents can go on, they can see at the beginning of the day in our elementary schools what the schedule is for the day. And within the classroom, it will have the asynchronous parts of lessons at times too. And I think that one of the benefits of Google Classroom is that, it allows an opportunity for teachers to give feedback real time through the platform so that kids are in a constant cycle of getting feedback on their instruction. About 22% of our students have opted to go to fully distance learning. But as Kathy mentioned, at times, depending upon who we have to quarantine, we have students in and out of that all the time. And so the flexibility that Kathy mentioned earlier is also kind of one of our course, beliefs, that we have to be continually flexible. And by having the classroom teacher, that single point of contact for those students, has been critical, I think, in the success in keeping our students engaged. At our middle and high school, just like Kathy mentioned, it's very, very similar. The students log on based on their bell schedule, and the expectation is that they're there. And because we have structures to follow through with them, to make sure that they're engaged in their learning through our student assistance processes, that we can kind of keep tabs with all of our different students throughout the course of the day. And we've seen an incredible amount of higher engagements because of that kind of shift in the structure. So the only thing I would add to is one of the things that we've tried to do to engage our distance learners, those that are 100% in distance learning, is we've created times throughout the school year, especially when the weather was nice, where our distance learners could come in to the school. They didn't literally come in, it was outside, because we know outside is safer. And they could interact with their classes, and I think that parents appreciated that, because we know the social emotional impact on the isolation of children, and we can't underestimate what that is. So we wanted to make sure that not only virtually were they included through breakout sessions, through engagement in class discussions, but also that they could physically see their classmates at least a couple times within the fall.
Thank you.
And just because I saw a question in there about the remote learners interacting with in person. So again, it's seamless. If you're in a breakout session, you might have 2 remote learners and 2 in-person learners. The classroom community is the classroom community. And I was in a classroom the other day, and the teachers, this is our family, and there's really no difference. The students are up on the screen, they can see each other. They have, when they're doing the breakout groups, they have their microphone, their headphones, and it's very similar to as similar as it could be to before the pandemic.
And in terms, I saw another question. For our in-person learners for K2, just as Kathy said, those children who are home are interacting in the very same manner that an 11th grader would be interacting. So they're logging on at certain points during the day. They're part of the classrooms. I also am able to do observations of class and interact with them. And the teachers are engaging with them in the same way as if they were sitting in front of them, we didn't put in a lot of special cameras within the classroom. We're doing it with laptops and document cameras and boards. And that's how we're making it work. Right. One little tip that I've learned is making sure you buy teachers rolling carts just to get around the room.
So if I could add too, that I know Kathy talked about the Vision of the Graduate that they've created. And there's actually a poster session in the virtual learning fair with information about the Farmington Vision of the Graduate. So if you want more information about that, please try out our expo area and check the Farmington information about their Vision of the Graduate.
So I'm going to pose one last question to each of you, and it has 2 parts. One is, can you name an obstacle to implementing your system that you had to really wrestle with and was maybe challenging for you? And then something that you have learned that you want to save from virtual learning when we return to full face-to-face. So an obstacle that you've figured out how to overcome, describe the obstacle and how you did that, and then tell us about what are the sort of those golden nuggets that you're able to glean from virtual learning that you want to apply once we get back face-to-face. And who wants to start?
I don't mind.
Okay.
I think the biggest obstacle at first was making the adjustment to include synchronous learning part of the core instructional model or the delivery model. And, you know, understandably, it's difficult, it's hard. And so learning the digital platforms and providing support for teachers so that they could more naturally, I guess is the best term, use those technological tools and, you know, and kind of overcoming issues with Wi-Fi and Zoom, you know, just kind of wrestling with those I guess structural issues that you know, that initially cause a lot of anxiety and stress for our teachers. And don't get me wrong, on any given day, I think any of us has stress. So it's not completely fixed. But as over time, as with anything, as you start to do it more and you provide the appropriate supports for students and their families, then I think that they see the meaningful difference it's made with our students. I guess in terms of what I'd like to keep is the level of collaboration. We are seeing our grade level teachers across the district collaborating in ways that they have not collaborated in the past. And so because they have learned, and it started last spring, to find value in really working together as a team, breaking down units, identifying, as Kathy said, those learning intentions and those key skills and ideas, and planning lessons collaboratively, that we have, I think, much more consistency and equity in how our curriculum is being delivered. And so I think that's something that I would love to continue.
Thank you. Kathy.
So I would agree with Christine. Every day there seems to be an obstacle that has to be overcome. I think generally our obstacle was infusing those tried and true leadership practices, those routines that we always engaged in a totally new way of engaging in school. So I think in March through June, we didn't do instructional rounds. We weren't doing coaching visits. That all of these practices that we know help to monitor, like Liz was saying, you know, monitor the implementation over time and make adjustments, provide feedback, provide support, all of those things, because the priority was just connecting and, you know, figuring out how to get kids the right technology and begin in March, all those things went away. And so over the summer, we really had to regroup and have that optimism that we can still do instructional rounds. I can still do my coaching visits. My principals can do their coaching visits. We made adjustments to teacher evaluation. We hadn't done teacher evaluation last year, but we knew this year we had to really be resilient, and we had to go back to those tried and true improvement routines that make us who we are. And so I would say that was a huge obstacle to kind of reframe everything and say we can continue to do these things in this new environment, and we're going to do it differently and maybe even better than we did before. And so that really moves into like, what would I keep from this would be definitely parent engagement through virtual meetings has been transformational. We do informational sessions now where we would get 10, 15 parents. Now we're getting 70, 80 parents or more engaging in those informational sessions. So I think that gone are the days of in-person informational sessions and PTO meetings, because our families are so busy and they need to have that flexibility. And, you know, there was a part of all of us that say, why didn't we think about this before? But this time has pushed us to do that. I also think that, you know, our students and families' lives are complicated, and you know, there are students that sometimes are out of school for periods of time. And I think this has opened the door for synchronous live streaming, kids being home, kids being in school, you know, as a flexibility for our students to ensure equitable access at all times. We have students that are in other countries, you know, they actually traveled during the summer, haven't come back. They're still part of the Farmington Public Schools. we're able to live stream from anywhere. I think there's just so many opportunities here for sharing programs across districts. So we have a lot to think about, post-pandemic, and taking all these lessons learned and applying them.
Thank you. I'm seeing an entry in the chat here. At all costs, we must swim. I really like that. I think it definitely applies to this session. I'm also scanning the chat for questions. I don't see a lot right now, so I'm going to ask one final question, and then I think it's going to be time to wrap up. I know both of you pay a lot of attention to teacher learning. And there was a very steep curve for teachers when they first entered this virtual learning environment, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous or partial or whatever. I know that both of you have considered very deeply what your teachers need to succeed. What did you do to ensure that they felt confident, or that they grew in their confidence, I should say, as teachers in a virtual learning environment? If just give us one or two ideas that you used. Chris, you want to go, and then we'll go back to Kathy?
Sure. I think the first thing is we gave them time to plan together. And I think that time to plan together was critical, because they could talk through any issues that they were having with whether it was with curriculum or an instructional model that they needed. The second thing is we created a digital learning Google site for our teachers, and it's actually for our families too. And there's a link in the presentation, which I put in the chat, to our Google site. And it has tons of resources. And we have a fabulous director of supervisor of digital learning. And so she has created a lot of, real-time videos and resources that teachers, as they're using different platforms. So in addition to what we formally offer them, we let them drive the ship and say what they needed to make the model work successfully. And then we created a digital kind of bank of resources so that if teachers wanted to explore at different points, a new technology that might help with collaboration or whatever it is, that we had short, simple instructional videos that they could go to at their leisure. And we found that alone, by giving them choice in their learning, helped to really promote their skills and broaden what they were doing instructionally with students.
Thank you. And Kathy?
I would say very similar. Teaming is critical. Having dedicated teaming time for teachers to support one another and share the amount of work that this takes each day. And they also support one another with well-being and self-care. So it's really critically important, the team time. I'd also say having specialists that also share in the work and can support our teachers with resources and sample lessons and go in and model lessons. That's been really critical. And the last was just an idea we had. Connecticut gave us some flexibility in the amount of school days. So we made the 3 so we only have to go 177 days, not 180. And we took the 3 days and we made them self-directed professional development days, where our teachers on their own are learning and engaging and work together. And we are not facilitating, we are not part of it. It's really teacher directed. And that has been both morale wise and learning wise has been just really profound for us. So that was another idea. I just can't say enough about our teachers and our faculty and staff. They are the champions of this time, our custodians, everyone working together. It's been incredible. And just lastly, I would say I have a PowerPoint that I've shared that can be posted, and all of the links to all of the information, whether it's our theory of action, mastery-based learning, vision of the global citizen, they're all linked on that PowerPoint, so people can have access to it.
Thank you. We're about to close here, and I just want to close by saying, Kathy, to echo what you started with, and Christine, I know it's what you believe, that teachers are the heroes here in this situation, and we are so eternally grateful. We hear so much about loss of learning time, yet with the help of the center, the work that they've structured, the resources they've provided, I think we don't necessarily have to see learning loss. We might even see some learning gain if we think carefully and plan carefully for virtual learning. Thank you so much for your time this morning and for sharing your thoughts. We also appreciate all the links that you've provided, and really grateful to have you sharing your experience. Also very grateful to the center for the work that they've done, not only on behalf of Connecticut students, but certainly students hopefully around the world, because I know that we have some international educators on this webinar. So with that, I'll turn it over to George.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you to Christine and Kathy, and also Michael and Liz for their contributions today. You know, the big takeaway for me, and listening to Christine and Kathy talk about the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. So they didn't have to reinvent curriculum. They didn't have to reinvent assessment. They had these systems in place. And so they were able to pivot using the systems that are tried and true and that have been, you know, embedded in their districts, you know, for the long term. So I think that's a great lesson for everyone, is that, you know, if you have that strong foundation, if you have those good systems in place, they're going to serve you well, and you're going to be able to respond to whatever eventualities come before you. And I would also like to echo what everyone has said about the role of teachers and how instrumental they have been and heroic they have been. But I'd also like to add my thanks to the leaders, the school leaders and the district leaders who recognize that our teachers are heroes and who provide them with the resources and, you know, not to be missed, provide them with the time that they need in order to be successful and to collaborate. Another thing that we know is so important, whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or not. So thank you to all of our school leaders for the work that they've done. So with that, I will bring this session to a close. For all of our panelists, my co-host Diane, and everyone at NEASC, I'm George Edwards. Thank you very much for joining us today, and be safe.